Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. Welcome to Mikkipedia, and this week on the podcast I am joined by Darren Ellis, who is the former owner of CrossFit New Zealand, which was the first CrossFit gym in New Zealand. And we talk all about considerations as we age for men over 40 years. So Darren sort of reached this place where he was frustrated with the state of fitness and nutrition industry and has spent years researching and experimenting to find the most effective way to better health, performance and fitness. This is, of course, on the back of a master's degree in exercise physiology. So his main aim is to share what he's learned with as many people as possible, teaching them that there are no shortcuts with exercise, but that it can be achievable and even fun with good coaching and a supportive peer group. And Darren and I talk all about some of these myths and misconceptions as we age and what we might need to change as we move into our sort of later decades. And of course, this is focused on men's health, but I think that a lot of these lessons, all this information is definitely transferable across the population. Before we jump into the show, just remind you that the best way to support the podcast is to hit subscribe on the platform that you're listening to and share this with your mates who might also be interested in these topic areas. And of course, you could totally go that extra mile by jumping onto my website, williden.com, and signing up to any one of my meal plans, but maybe even my recipe portal access, where you get access to over 900 recipes now. You also get a weekly email from me. You get to join our private Facebook community where I run regular forums, and you get the opportunity to pick my brain about anything to do with your own nutrition and health information. All contacts for Darren can be found in the podcast show notes, but for now, please listen to this awesome conversation that I had with Darren Ellis. Wait till lunch. Funny how things change.
Things do change. I guess that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, huh?
Well, yeah, we are, because you're a wealth of information and I've followed you for a long time, and you've been really helpful with me with regards to my running. I think maybe even 5 or 6 years ago, and we caught up for coffee and you gave me some sort of insight into some strength and training stuff that I could do. But, you know, I've long known you as a good friend of Dr. Cliff Harvey, who has been on the show a number of times now, who I know you're also collaborating on a project with him. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that project, Darren. Can you kick us off by giving me a backstory? So with regards to your professional interest in this area, so let us know sort of where you've come from, but also your personal interest as well.
All right. Try to compress that into a fairly short story. Although, like, at least we went to a bit of a humble brag, I guess. You know, this industry of it, well, the fitness in particular, less so the nutrition, which I couldn't speak to in terms of understanding career paths. But fitness per se, it's about 3 years on average that people stay in that industry. It's very transient. And perhaps not thought of as a real job. And I've been doing it 20 years.
Yeah.
So I've been around the traps a fair while. So I do take a bit of pride in that. And sometimes I have to, typical Kiwi, I have to remind myself to take some pride in that.
Yeah.
Before that, though, was not up to much. Not a lot of direction. Although, again, you could say the writing was on the wall. I laugh that I failed every subject in 7th form, except for PE. I got first place. First place award for that. But because I failed everything else, I couldn't take it off to university and pursue it any further. So I bummed around in some dead-end jobs for a while, and then went overseas and did a few more dead end jobs. But what it also did was opened up the world to travel, experience, maturity. And I learned a lot about myself, about the world. And then I came back and became an adult student and did the degree that I probably should have done if I'd applied myself in the first place. So University of Auckland, then master's degree, exercise physiology. And as I was finishing that off, realized, there was not a lot in the way of careers, despite my qualifications. So I was working in gyms the entire time, started doing boot camps because that was the sort of popular thing. And while researching like ways to make that more interesting, find new workouts, etc., stumbled across sort of somewhat simultaneously CrossFit and the movie 300. And there was a big thing about how the actors for the 300 trained and transformed their bodies to become these gladiators and run around in loincloths and capes. And
when was this, Darren?
This was 2007.
Okay, so I'm trying to so CrossFit itself didn't sort of blow up on the scene maybe only 3 years earlier, or was it 7 years earlier?
And some people might refer to me as an OG, and I certainly, in New Zealand, I am. I started the first one in this country, which was one of the first 500 in the world, which there's now about 15,000.
Amazing.
But there are people certainly more OG than me, and they're typically 2005, 2006. I think Rob started the first official affiliate 2003 or 4, 5, something like that. Maybe, So it was somewhere around there. But 2007, 8 was that initial surge, and then you would probably say the peak of popularity was about 12, 13, 14 even, when it was really all around there.
So you started the first CrossFit gym in New Zealand.
Yes.
Were we all ready for that?
Not at all. No, because of course no one knew what it was. So I was forever trying to explain to people why they should pay me considerably more than the sort of considered going rate for a gym to come and get incredibly uncomfortable in a dirty, grimy, rotting old building, industrial building.
Interesting, eh?
Yeah. And of course, it was the sort of grimy underground feel that actually started to appeal to people. Not to mention the fact that it was very different to anything anyone had done, and then they were getting very, very fit.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? If I think about the rise in other gyms now, F45, Orange Theory, BFT might be another one. Very similar sort of model and considerable expense compared to paying, say, $25 a week to go to your gym, do a step class, and maybe like do some laps of the pool. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's been an interesting transition too. I might be getting slightly off on a tangent here, but what's been really interesting to see is that for CrossFit, they were putting the justification behind the higher price in the value of the coaching that had not really been applied in the modern gym world for some time, if at all. You could maybe hark back to, some very early days where just people were sort of, they really were coach with a capital C, and they were very invested in that. But, once it became commoditized and the health club kind of 80s sort of thing, that was lost. CrossFit brought that back, and it was worth that kind of money. What we see with some of those other gyms that are now kind of popular on the scene, they are actually charging a price they know they can get because it is popular. Yeah. It is status. It's social media signaling, which is very interesting. And I'll say no more about that, but I just think it's an interesting transition.
For sure.
That so people now see the value in paying that money just because that's what you do. You wear $300 white sneakers, you have a Rolex, you drive a sports car, you train at X.
Hilarious you say Rolex. It is showing your age.
It probably is. Yeah. What's now? I don't even know what. I actually remember.
Garmin.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I actually recall reading a while back that Rolex missed the boat, and this is a similar thing. Their watches were not expensive enough, and so other companies came out with more expensive watches because the very rich people needed something more.
Yeah, interesting.
Which, similar kind of story. Yeah.
So Darren, in terms of your own sort of fitness journey, if you like, because you were one of New Zealand's best CrossFitters, weren't you? Like you were in there, you were coaching, but you were also going to the CrossFit Games, you were running a gym, you were totally in that scene. And also, of course, you probably were responsible for some of those initial kind of paleo conversations, even though you certainly place yourself well within the exercise science camp, because that is where your area is. Of course, you have some experience and knowledge in that nutrition stuff as well. So I sort of feel like you were definitely the early adopter. You were the person responsible for the early adopters in New Zealand in that space. So physically for you, how did that influence your own training and your own sort of growth in that area?
Well, that is a very interesting question. I'm very blessed, lucky, I guess, that I got the benefit of having a foot in both camps. I mean, CrossFit was very. It definitely had a science basis to it, and it had a lot of what I also appreciate, which is some real world sort of bro science, which is like, we've tried this and it works, and thus we're doing it, and which got a lot of pushback from science because it was but the melding of the two, I guess, really sound scientific principles and things that are harder to prove, like the power of working out in a community in terms of effort that you bring and things like that. So I like to think that I was always doing functional fitness before I discovered CrossFit, because I understood that squat, hinge, push, pull was the fundamental thing to do to make yourself healthy and strong and fit. So I squatted, I deadlifted, I pushed, I pulled. But yeah, the thing about CrossFit at the time was, a normal gym workout was, you went to the gym, you went into the cardio room, you warmed up, then you went into the strength room and you did strength, and then you went back into the cardio room and you did cardio, and then you went home. And that was great, actually, because this is the thing, it did work for a lot of people if you did that consistently. CrossFit said, hey, why don't you grab that bike and wheel it into the strength room and do both?
Yeah.
And and it worked. It worked because it was a stimulus that people hadn't had before. It worked because it was more fun. It worked because it was more varied. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong necessarily, but humans are just, we're terrible. We need that bright, shiny thing.
Yeah, totally.
And it worked because it was gamified. So there are a lot of things going for it. And we'll delve into some of the reasons why those were not so good. I'm sure it's along this chat, but certainly those were the things that really pushed it along in popularity very, very quickly.
Yeah. Okay. And in fact, what I would love for us to discuss sort of today is, of course, the potential pitfalls of, I suppose, training and nutrition in the area that you're interested in, like men over 40, etc. And so what you've just described is where it might go wrong. That might sort of fall into that space. But to sort of get us there, what has been your last few years and your interest, I suppose, in the last few years? How's that changed to sort of bring you to this point where you're now super interested in that resiliency of men over 40?
Yeah, well, and part of it is simply aging, realizing that things are changing. Let's call a little bit of wisdom, hopefully, along with that. I went to the CrossFit Games in 2015 as a masters athlete, competing in the 40 to 44 bracket, and I qualified for those like second in this region. Second in the world. And so, sure, I was, as far as CrossFit measures it, I was pretty much the fittest 40-year-old walking around at the time. But my shoulder ached every day. My back was constantly out. I had this knee thing, this ankle thing. Wrists were always in pain. That's the price of sport, though. And I think you could argue any sport. I know you certainly could speak to ultras and things like that, Mikki. There's a level of sacrifice. We're not really built to do a lot of the things we do in sport, but we are capable of them. And there's some benefits to kind of risking it, I guess, to compete, whether it's with yourself or with others. And then, of course, there's millions of dollars on the line in some sports, and so there's value to that. After I went to the games, which is an amateur sport, there's no money for that. I took a step back and thought, well, everyone was asking, are you going to go again? Because I actually competed injured. So I went over there as a sort of podium favorite. Ended up 12th out of 20, so not really that great. And I had fun, but I also didn't, in the sense of I'd put pressure on myself. I felt pressure from others. I wanted to do well. I wanted to impress. There was some ego involved, and instead I just was sore, outclassed. And but when it came time to think about going again, the questions coming up were, do I have the time to train to do this? Do I have the desire? And what is the what's the benefit? What's the benefit? The cost benefit ratio, and it was not in favor of going again or trying to go again. So instead, I started focusing on training to feel better, and lo and behold, once that started to work, it's kind of like the smoker giving up cigarettes and going, "Oh, that's what a full lungful of air feels like." I had no idea.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because if I think about people that I work with, a lot of them, my athlete sort of population, are coming to me in their sort of mid to late 30s. They've gone through that traditional route. They've got married, had a family. They've hit the corporate world. They're sort of at the top of their game in the corporate world, and now they're looking for another challenge. And so the people that I work with, a lot of the time it's endurance sport, and it's not that they're not doing the other sort of things on the side, but they're like, really want to knock something else off, like an ultra run or a triathlon, that kind of thing. Remembering in their minds of the athlete that they were when they were 18, 19, 20, thinking that it's going to be the same. So I think this is what makes this such a sort of pertinent issue, is that women, I think, maybe it's just because I am a woman, but we're much more aware of, or some of us, our limitations, if you like, and our health, whereas men aren't necessarily sort of burdened by that knowledge, and it can sort of work against them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and of course, there's definitely it can go both ways, but it's men tend to be a bit more guilty of the ego thing, and if we want to blame testosterone, if we want to blame the gender sort of makeup of traditional male female roles, who we think we're supposed to be. That's a big one, right? The alpha lion, and then like the young ones start coming around growling, and do you have to defend your territory? They certainly, I'm a new dad, so I felt that sort of thing. I was joking with an old friend about this new dad, like defense, feeling. Do I need a baseball bat behind the door from now on? That sort of carry on, and it's a real thing. And so when you what typically happens, I think, is 20s, you're naturally fit enough. You can stay lean without really. I know I lived on fast food from Friday night to Sunday night every single weekend. Late teens, early 20s. And it wasn't a problem. Partly that's society, naturally active. I often talk, actually, like I started CrossFit about the year that the first iPhone was invented. So my first clients, they didn't have 8 hours a day of cranked neck screen time. So they were also generally saying, I used to do triathlons, I've done some bodybuilding, in this relatively small time, 15 years, we've gone from people who are just reasonably active, even if they wouldn't have said they were, they certainly were compared to now. So what's happened is these 40-year-old guys have spent their 30s building a career and building families. So they've let their health dwindle, And so it's almost like they've skipped a step. They've been so focused on work. 20s, yeah. I mean, I did this. Like every winter, or rugby training rolls around, and I gained like 3 kilos over the summer, but then it disappeared in 2 weeks, and I was back with a couple of weeks of suicides, and I was crushing it. And they just skip over their entire career of 30s. Now they get into late 40s, and they're like, well, I know what I need to do because it worked last time. Start doing suicides.
Yeah.
And cut out some beer. Oh, shoot, it's not working. And my knee hurts.
Yeah. And I know a few people and have a few clients, and I feel really troubled by the idea that they've got these really big, lofty sports goals, be it triathlon, be it wanting to go to CrossFit 5 times a week, because my mates go, this ultra run. Yet they're literally coming from the couch, and in their head, they should be able to go out and, have this sort of, fairly moderate in terms of the sport training program, like maybe only 10 hours a week, which to me is still phenomenal, but, 10 hours a week. And they're not understanding why they're unable to sort of execute what is in their head supposed to be like super easy. So what are some of those, what are some of the reasons for the difficulty in physically getting back into it?
Yeah, well, we all love to blame metabolism, right? And it's like, you hear those rules, like 8 glasses of water and 10,000 steps, and your metabolism decreases by 10% a year or a decade or something. And we know, like, a lot of the latest research is showing that we actually stay relatively flat until we hit our 60s, and even then, it's not a massive, like, rapid decline. It ain't your metabolism; it's you don't have time. You're more stressed. Certainly, there are some hormonal changes. I think it's the stress. I think about traveling through Africa for 8 months in my 20s and just lying in a tent for days on end, doing nothing. There's no responsibility in my life. I can do whatever I want. Now, work, kids, providing family, buying a home in today's current climate. Just no time, not sleeping enough. Trying to make that deal or finish that project or whatever, and then to go and then subject yourself to more stress, which is what training is. And I think people often forget that. There's 2 types of stress. We've got EU stress, which means good stress, and distress, which is the bad stress. And most people, when they think about exercise, they always pick distress.
Yeah.
More volume, more intensity, more impact, and there's plenty of eustress style ways to train that actually can help us. That's walking, zone 2 work, mobility work, prehab flows, and active recovery sessions, and cold and hot exposure, and just simple play. Like, I like to get on the balance beam and the slack line and do handstands and throw the frisbee. That sort of stuff is really, really important. And I think, we just jump straight in with a full 10 hours of distress, when maybe if it was 5 hours of distress, because, we do need to stress the muscles and the cardiovascular system to create adaptation. But if we're not recovering or adapting to that, it's no point. So what if that 10 hours was 5 hours of distress work, 5 hours of eustress work, heck, 5 more hours of sleep?
Yeah. And you raise such a good point. I think as a typical type A, which a lot of people who might be listening to this might fall into that category, or a lot of people who decide that they want to do these massive events or these challenges, they are type A. And so for them, it's almost like their lifestyle lends itself to wanting to blow off some steam. And the way that they traditionally blow off steam is to do some of that, zone 4, zone 5 type work, because your cortisol is already elevated, and you're going to get this big dump if you go out and sort of do it, a big, dump in hormones, and, feel better for a moment. But it's that sort of day in, day out situation which doesn't lend itself well to people. And then on top of it, they're doing sessions like that, and then they're sitting in their home office for 8 hours, back-to-back meetings, not really moving, not really thinking about moving because they've just done that session, or they're just about to do that session. So in their head, they've sort of almost accounted for this idea that they're sedentary by doing that structured stuff, not recognizing actually that other much more calming, much more eustress type approach is probably going to be better for them.
Yeah, well, it's crazy, isn't it? I spoke before about the sort of smartphone connection. As a population, we are more sedentary across the day than we've ever been at any point in history. Also, as a population, we are performing more intense, more volume exercise than we've ever performed in history. So it's a weird clash, and they don't match.
No,
You
not when you look
can't
at the health
crush
statistics.
yourself for an hour and then do nothing for 23. Plus, have some wine and beer and whatever, insert whatever sort of junk food you like because I earned it.
Yeah.
It's created, and I use this term. It sounds mean, but I say it this way to prove a point, or to prove what I'm trying to say is I saw a lot of fat CrossFitters in my time, and I apply that as blanket. I mean, really fat fit people, where they have a lot of capacity, they have a lot of endurance, they have a lot of strength, endurance, a lot of power, but because they haven't changed their lifestyle outside of training, they are naturally, their body composition is perhaps not where it could be. And we talk about if we go into obesity research, that obese and overweight people who lose just a fraction of body fat see massively increased health markers, and yet these fit people are kind of going the other way. So what does it mean if you're doing all these things to be fit, and yet your body composition is slowly creeping up by a small fraction? Does that in turn then mean that our health markers are taking a plunge to a significant level? And I do wonder about that, that we're seeing people who are very fit, but perhaps are not doing a lot for their health span, their longevity. And that's outside of blood. We can talk about the joint health and loss of mobility and things like that as well. But it's, again, it's a very, I'm not sure if I'm going to call it my theory or my hypothesis, but I do see a potential issue around it with the recreational, intense athletes, shall we say.
Yeah, and they're your population, aren't they? They're the people.
Yeah, well, we love to be social, and you'd see it too, right, Mikki? Dare I say you're one of them? But you've got the compromise. I think you've got the sweet spot, right? Because of your knowledge, practice. There's nothing wrong with going for a beer after a long run, but it's one or two. And it's not every day or whatever the ratio is, maybe everyone's got to find their sweet spot. But I think too often we justify where that sweet spot is, knowing that that's not really the sweet spot.
Yeah. Okay. In the sort of population that you're interested in, that we talk like in that sort of mid to late over 40s range, what are some of the major health problems you're seeing?
Joint pain or just outright injury is certainly very high up there.
Yeah.
Again, the stuff we got away with in our 20s, right? Maybe just catches up with us. I've got a left shoulder it's from bench pressing at 19 years old. It still gives me grief, and until medical science injects nanobots into me, and hopefully in the next 10 or 20 years, and it fixes it all up, I'm just dealing with it, and I can do pretty much anything. But it'll give me some pain from time to time, or if I do something silly, it'll flare up. And you come back to those 40-year-olds who try to jump back into stuff too soon. We often will see issues there. So I'd say, just general musculoskeletal kind of injuries are huge. And then, the secondary thing is that underlying stuff. So, you talked about the stress relief or the stress release of people. And I've, had clients all the time saying, I just need, I'd be perhaps suggesting to them to button off a little bit. You don't understand the kind of day I've had. I just need to blow off some steam.
Yeah.
Right? But I can snort a line or inject some heroin or something, and I'll feel better too. But what happens after that? And if I'm doing that every day, we know that's a problem. Now, I don't want to be comparing hard exercise to injecting heroin, but there are negatives to training very intensely. And if training intensely is the only way to blunt that stress response with a nice hefty dollop of endorphins, we're also getting the cortisol after that, and it doesn't tend to add up over time. because we're not addressing the reason, right? And of course, I could tell someone, well, you've got to quit your job, you've got to adopt your kids out, and move your PT in. We can't quite go to that extremes. Like celebrity, like actors doing these massive transformations and becoming black belts in jiu-jitsu in 6 months because they're getting paid 20 million and they can do whatever they need to do. We're not in the same luxury position, but at the same time, there's got to be some compromises we can make.
Yeah. And in your experience, Darren, like, are people ready to hear stuff like that when you're talking to them? If they've got some idea of what they need to be doing, yet you're telling them not the opposite, but you're giving them a modified version, like how open are they to to the concept that actually underlying all of this is health, and what they sort of want to be doing isn't necessarily lending itself to that? Is health a motivator for them the way that you would think it should be?
I think people are getting there, right? Like you probably have seen a similar shift. The number of people who are willing to have cold showers and ice baths and putting saunas in their backyards and things like, we're certainly seeing a growth. I don't know if that's what's the word? I'm talking about the ones who take supplements. The
healthy, the worried well.
Worried well, yeah. And maybe it's a lot of the worried well who are doing those things. But yeah, we're seeing that growth where, whether it's, more self-help books available, more people paying attention to mindfulness and breathing and meditation and gratitude journals and things like that. There is a shift for sure. But yeah, we've got a lot of work still to do.
Yeah.
And so typically, my goal, if we come back simply to workout programming, I'm trying to find a way to find a compromise. I understand the appeal of a hard workout. I live that. I love doing it. But I also love feeling so good after a workout the next day, no soreness, that I can go for a surf, I can go for a run, I can do whatever and not feel like the training I did is impacting on the rest of my life. And now I'm looking again to the 40-year-old. When you're in your 20s, you can totally, have a disproportionate approach to life. So if you want to live in the gym and train for the CrossFit Games, or train to be an ultra runner or do Ironman, absolutely devote 20, 30 hours a week to training. That's cool. But when you don't have that time, you've got to find a different approach. So it's a bit of a compromise. Like, how do I find some of that fun, some of that challenge, some of that variety without driving risk? So it's like this is loosely related, but this is something that I think I say to a lot of people. Do you understand that you will die one day? Well, yes, of course. All right. So do you also understand then that at some point you can't be any stronger, or can't run a faster mile, or whatever? Yeah. All right. But you're not acting that way. Like we just said, you're 65 years old and you just said, oh, well, I used to do 5-minute splits. Yeah. How old were you? All right. So why are we talking about that? You're 65 and you have an upcoming knee replacement. So like 5-minute splits, there's no point in even discussing that. What can we do now? I used to be able to squat 200 kilos. Well, sure. But it's not, the legend of Milo, which is this Greek myth that when Milo was born, his father gave him a baby calf and he said, lift the calf over your head. And every day Milo lifted the calf. And of course, as the calf grew bigger, so Milo grew stronger. And eventually he's putting this 1,000-pound bull over his head and he's the strongest man in all of Greece. It's not a linear thing. At some point we stop. So, sure, some people will keep PRing until they're 50, 60 years old. Most of us are going to find that we're going to hit our limits in our 30s somewhere. So how do we, I guess what I'm really saying, right, is that we have to make peace with it. Yeah. At some point, we can't be better by those metrics, or at least the metrics we were judging ourselves by. Yeah. But why does it have to be what's the most you can back squat once? What about maybe you can improve 10 RM? Yeah. Maybe you can improve your single leg squat.
Darren, so in my next couple of years, I really want to run the Boston Marathon, right? And the qualifying time for my age groups, because I'll be 45 in July, and the qualifying time for my age group is 3 hours 50. So my PB is 2:55. I've recently run, I was injured, but we ran just under 4 hours or 3:49 or something at New York. But I know that if I trained, but I'm pretty sure if I trained, then I could be close to my most recent pretty good time of like 3:17 or 3:18. But the fact that qualifying time for Boston, which is an event that almost everyone wants to do, is 3 hours 50, should tell me a little bit about that aging process. That actually it's okay to have, I don't need to necessarily set my goal at 3:18. Why not set my goal at like 3:35? I've still got a 15-minute buffer in order to sort of make my age group. And I think that's really reflective of that sort of changing the goalposts in order to sort of just so you can make peace. And I think I had a bit of that light bulb moment just this weekend. Yeah.
And here's the other thing to think about. How many hours per week on average would you have to train to run a 3:17 again versus running a 3:49?
Well,
it'll be vastly different.
Yeah, and actually most different would probably be in the intensity that I have to run when I do it, which is really what I should be working on. But, like I don't have to kill myself twice a week. I might only have to kill myself once every 10 days.
Yeah, which is huge when you're dealing with, let's say, work stress, family stress, general life stress. That's the thing is the reality of where you're at. And I think what a lot of people, perhaps don't understand is that, again, whether they're comparing themselves to outliers on social media, just because Tom Brady's done it 12 years in a row doesn't mean you can. Also, he's in the safe position. He's not really getting battered like some of these other guys.
Yeah.
But if you were to train 4 or 5 times a week and you could reach, let's say, 85% of your genetic potential, but to reach 90% of your genetic potential, you may have to double that training volume or double the intensity. Is it worth it?
Yeah.
And I don't want to come at this with this cop out like here's Darren telling everyone not to try. But it's just a reality of if you want to be 90 plus of your potential, cool, commit to it. If you want to be the best in the world, then you take the risk. I think that's the cool thing about humans as well. Like we're willing to have a go. But for every, CrossFit world champion, marathon world champion, there's thousands of people who maybe could have made it, but they blew out a knee, they hurt their shoulder, they accidentally got pregnant, they got hit by a car, they got a promotion, whatever, so many things that can get away. And so it's really it's a huge choice. And I do think it's stuff that's worth talking about because I was watching something just today where it was like, everyone wants to jump in the pool, but no one wants to get wet kind of thing. Like, wanting cake and eat it too. It's a lot of that. And I definitely get people come to me saying, I want this and I want that and I want to achieve that. I go, but you are 45, you're overweight, you have a 70-hour a week, job, you have 4 kids.
What's going to give? Yeah.
What's going to give?
Yeah. Darren, in your experience, like how much does alcohol play into some of the sort of health challenges that men are facing, like men in that sort of like middle age? And I'll just tell you just a really quick, quite funny story. We were down sitting at a bar a couple of weeks ago, and then on the table beside us were these bunch of probably mid-50s, early 60s men, and they're talking quite loudly about all of the rugby players that from maybe 2000 to 2004 that they used to watch and play against, and they were basically just kind of reliving their best life and experience, trying to one-up each other on who they knew from old school cricket, New Zealand, rugby, talking about their high school rugby days, about how, Auckland Grammar, they used to play for Auckland Grammar 40 years ago. So people still sort of live in that sort of, in the glory days, if you like.
Yeah.
But what I found even more interesting was that these guys were all kind of mildly to moderately overweight, carrying that visceral sort of body fat, downing beers like there was no tomorrow. Like it's such a disconnect. But anyway, I was thinking about the alcohol thing, and that story sprang to mind.
And hey, New Zealand has quite the culture of it, don't we? And it's very much associated with sport too. And I think, there's so much to unpack there, but certainly very quickly, there's a habit thing in there, right? So again, 20s, you get away with it.
Yeah.
If you don't learn what your body is doing, how it's responding in your 30s, in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you're going to get a surprise. And then it's even harder to change those habits because they're ingrained. And the amount of people who are like, this is just what I do. This is just how it is. You don't understand. It's part of my work. I can't help you. It is a tough one. And I tell this sort of story and analogy a few times, right? When you are a big drinker in your 20s, maybe your parents and that will sort of shake their heads, but they get it and they've probably been through it. So they're like, okay, they're just young.
It's a phase.
In your 30s, it's kind of like, hey, maybe you should like think about. And then in your 40s, you're that dodgy guy in the nightclub, like who shouldn't be there. And all the other 20s who are in there dancing and having fun are looking at you going, weirdo.
And not just in the nightclub. You're that dodgy in that restaurant over there, for hours on end, just bottles on bottles.
Yeah. So to use the same analogy, what we need to be doing is when we were 20, I drove through Hamilton a couple of weeks ago and I remembered Shake's nightclub where we used to get the $1 beers and we'd fill the table during happy hour. So we got the deal. You got to go from that to when you're in your 40s, you can still enjoy alcohol, but maybe different. Or let's put it another way. 3 things that sort of involved in a Saturday night: alcohol, food, and friends.
Yeah.
So instead of a table full of $1 beers and 10 mates and crazy loud pumping music in a nightclub, it's a nice bottle of wine, one other couple, four good friends together in a restaurant enjoying a quality 3-course meal. So we've still got socializing, food, alcohol. It's just enjoyed in moderation, a completely different way and with a completely different mindset. So I guess, I haven't fully answered the question. What's been really interesting around the scientific research behind alcohol is, of course, a lot of people saying that there's benefits. Wine gets the big promotion. I saw an interesting study years back when I was doing my postgrad, and the graph was kind of a tick shaped, which showed that what was it, a reverse tick? Anyway, that 1 drink per day had the best sort of outcome measures for longevity.
Yeah.
But 0 was worse than 1.
Yeah.
And so was 2 and 3 and 4 got worse. Right? Yeah. So how is 0 drinks worse than 1 drink for longevity? And the theory was it's not the protective phytochemicals found in red wine. It's that people who have 1 glass of wine also practice moderation in other things. And they also are probably very social. If you're drinking 1 glass, it's probably with other people, even if it's just your significant other. But you're not sitting at home sinking in a bottle, or you're not out raging like that 20-year-old. So, alcohol can be a part of a healthy lifestyle, but it's all about the approach. It's not about the alcohol itself.
Yeah, totally. And, I had a client a few years ago, and it would be worn like a badge that he would drink 2 bottles of wine in an evening in the middle of the week, get up and function well the next day. And he might have been sort of on the cusp of 40, early 40s. And, he was a functioning alcoholic. And I think when I talk to people about the amount of alcohol that they drink, there are a number of people that might fall into that category purely because of the habitual nature of it. It's not even that I think they would struggle to come off it, but in their head, they're certainly no worse off for it the next day.
Yeah. I can't remember where I read it, so I really don't want to quote it as fact, but it was just a suggestion that 2 units of alcohol, if consumed daily, was considered binge drinking these days.
Yeah,
in terms of a negative effect.
Yeah.
Which is usually 1 glass, right? We think about the pour. It's usually 1 glass is 2 units. And hey, I've certainly spent many a week during lockdown consuming 2 units a day
Yeah,
for
yeah.
an extended length of time, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But not much more than that. And yeah, again, coming back to that moderation, it's coming back to that moderation. And I guess that's the thing. Again, it's the pull, but not wet.
Yeah.
And you would have had it as well. Like hey, Mikki, I'm coming to you with all these lofty goals, but just so you know, I don't want to give up eating chocolate and alcohol and fast food on the weekends.
Yeah.
What can you do for me?
Yeah. And I think sometimes people think that if they're paying you, then you're going to wave some magic wand and allow them to have their cake and eat it. And unfortunately, it's just not that easy, particularly as you age. Yeah.
But then there's this weird, perhaps sort of paradox that those same people, they see people like yourself enjoying a stout and some fries at the pub, and you'll get either the old like, oh, I caught you out, which always makes me laugh.
Yeah, same.
Or I don't understand. Like, how can you do this and you're preaching that? And I'm like, no, I'm not. This is not me conflicting with the advice I'm giving, because we are talking about moderation and
individualized context. I think that's what it is as well. Like I have lots of people do exactly what you've just described. They're like, Mikki, you told me that I couldn't have yogurt, and I'm like, you're intolerant to dairy. Your gut tells you that every time you eat it. So my recommendation is to cut that dairy out.
Yeah,
that's not what I struggle with. So
yeah. And there's another one. And to the listeners, this is not Mikki and I ganging up on you. It's just what we see as a general trend. But the clients I would have who would get sort of quite worried and upset and even downright scared around the approach of the Christmas season, because they knew how much excess calories and alcohol they were going to be consuming, or partly almost like it was out of their control. And it's perhaps another thing to talk about. But what I would say to them is the reason that they are upset about a 7 to 10 day stretch out of 365 is because the other 355 days were not that great either. And what the holiday season was really doing was holding a magnifying glass to their behavior the rest of the year.
Yeah.
People who are relatively consistent throughout the year are not worried about Christmas and are perhaps still behaving the same way that those other people did in terms of what they ate and drank. But it's a small blip in an otherwise very consistent year, which thus makes it not only, I'm not going to say allowable, not only doable, but ceases to be a problem. Whether it's from the physiological effect on the body, or more importantly, perhaps the psychological effect that we can have the beer and the cake and whatever, and just it's not even thought about that. Oh, I'm being naughty, I'm cheating. I'm going to have to run further tomorrow. You just you enjoy Christmas Day and you carry on with the rest of your life. So I think that's a big thing. And that circles back to one of my biggest sort of rants. It's consistency. It just does not matter really what the methodology is, or the special magic bullet, or the ancient training technique. It's like, if you're not doing it most days, it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Such a good point, Darren. So, we've talked about the difference between the type of exercise that people could think about when they get older, their mindset around alcohol, and also letting go of, I guess, past glory to sort of accept where they are. What are some other things that men of in their middle age, what are other things that you see they need to think about more that they perhaps aren't?
I guess just to add another point to that, like past glory. Guys, think about all the old kung fu movies and things like that. It's the wise old master who does not fight anymore. Why does he not fight anymore? He doesn't have to prove shit. He knows he's good. He knows he's got the goods. And yeah, sure, in the movie, eventually he fights or does what he has to do. But stop worrying about past glories and just be content that you did it. And you're probably more financially better off. You've got a loving family. You've got a great career. Maybe you've got a bit of extra free, recreational time because of the work you've done during your 30s and 40s. And just, be proud of that and do what you can do, not worrying about trying to prove to some 20-year-olds who don't even care, to be honest.
Is that a little bit of, I don't know if you have heard of Alain de Botton before, and I have sort of probably butchered his name a little bit, but he's a modern day philosopher who had a book on status anxiety. And in fact, and I think this is sort of where that falls into, is that we are so concerned with how we might appear to our next door neighbours that we do ourselves a bit of a disservice, and we're no longer worried. Back in, I suppose, our modern history, like people who were born into service, let's say, of an aristocrat or something, so there were definitive classes, they never compared themselves to, I suppose, being in that sort of upper echelon, because it was never going to be an option. But we were sold this idea that, you can make anything possible as long as you work hard enough and try hard enough. And maybe that's part of where some of that comparison comes into. I think
that's huge, right? Because what do we see on social media? But just some crazy things. And just the way that stuff's progressing, and I forget what the trick was, but Tony Hawk spent his whole life trying to perfect the 720 or 960 flip spin thing. And when he finally did it, now there's 12-year-olds doing it. The 4-minute mile, right? 25 or 28 people broke the 4-minute mile the year that Bannister did it.
Amazing.
And things just keep moving up, right? But does that mean that the 4-minute mile is easy to run? No, it's still really freaking hard. But now you could be forgiven for thinking that it's kind of doable. It's not. Yeah. It's really hard. So if you can run a 5-minute mile, I think my best time ever, and I remember being sore for 10 days straight. I ran a 5:14 on a track, and I'll probably never run faster than that again. And that killed me, absolutely killed me. And, I could say, maybe 5 minutes and perhaps with training I could do that, but I ain't doing 4. And I shouldn't be trying.
I don't know how this will sound, because it's not supposed to sound like I'm amazing, but I only really lined up a few times in my life to do a 1500, which is not quite a mile. And I finished the 1500 with all of these girls half my age vomiting beside me. And I was like, I certainly wasn't first. Like I was last, I think, or second last. And I might have done 5:18 or something. And I'm like, so what's up with them? I just couldn't run fast enough. Couldn't push myself fast enough. So that's as far as I got. But anyway, I'm sorry. So
that's right. So we were coming back to, I guess, the type of training that people should be doing. I think something to always remind ourselves of is what do we ultimately want, right? It's like the 5 whys, or, the BHAG goal. And if you put a gun to someone's head, typically they just want to live a long and happy life and be around for their kids and their family and that sort of thing. And we just forget that so often, and we get stuck in this, like, sort of seeking this social glory, or whatever you want to call it, or competitiveness. If we can all be honest that we sort of just want to be like vaguely attractive naked, and can sit on the toilet without wincing, and get off again, and be able to do that for a reasonable, just give me a fair amount of time on this earth to do that, then I'm happy, and it's probably somewhere between 75 and 95. It seems like we can't really change the genetic switch around that time, but we can certainly improve, the quality of that time. So we want to be strong, and let's not forget though that strong, this is the same topic. Strong can mean an 1,100 pound back squat now, because there's people that do that. There's lots of people that do that. But if you can squat, and I'm just using pounds because it sounded more impressive then, but let's come back to the sensible measurement of the world. If you could squat your own body weight, so that's around 50 or 60, 70 kilos for a woman, or 70, 80, 90 kilos for a man, you're strong. Yeah. And if you can do double that, you're very strong. And you should probably stop there, or maybe a little bit past that, if you're not into breaking the world record in powerlifting. Yeah. And focus on the other important things, such as mobility. Can you squat all the way down to the ground? Can you get back up from the ground without losing balance? And there's a test out there. You'd probably know about that one, Mikki. I think it's a Swedish test. Get down on the floor and stand back up again. And you start with 10 points, and you lose a half point if you have a wobble, and you lose a full point if you put a knee or a hand on the floor. Yeah. And that was the predictive measure of longevity. And apparently, it's, draw conclusions of those kind of ones of what you will, but there was some accuracy in it. And that's what it was. We know that people falls and breaking hips and wrists, and that it's a massive issue when we get old. So without name dropping, I trained a very famous ex-All Black a few years ago, and he couldn't get out of his car without wincing, even nearly screaming sometimes when his knees or his ankles or his back was playing up. And he was full of titanium screws and plates and this, that, and the other, and ligaments taken from here and put over there. And that's part of a career in a contact sport at the highest possible level. And he used to be able to squat nearly 200 kilos. What we did was train to be able to get down on the floor and back up again with his own body weight, like not extra himself, just down and up onto a nice padded mat. And we worked on that until he could do it without, biting his tongue off or, with pain. We dragged sleds and we rode and we did things that had low impact. And we built strength and capacity and mobility because that's the stuff he needs now in his 50s. Going forward, that's the stuff that's important. There's no need to build back to a 200 kilo back squat ever.
Yeah. I imagine he would have been quite accepting of that, given that what you were working on was reducing his day-to-day levels of pain and improving his quality of life.
You would think so. And eventually, yes. But I think that's a really interesting point. There were moments where the All Black came out and he would be disgusted at himself for this empty bar he had on his shoulders.
Yeah,
or disgusted for the sort of remedial work that he was doing. Because you don't forget, and I don't know if that's some kind of protective mechanism, but we don't forget how good we used to be, and it haunts us. It haunts us. It's horrible. And making peace with that, I think, is one of the biggest superpowers you could possibly possess. Well, let's say you're not gifted this one. You have to grow that yourself. I talk a lot about seeking purpose, not PRs anymore. That's what we're trying to do. It came back to what we're speaking of a little while ago. Like, you can't keep getting stronger. So if at some point you can't PR, and I see people used to quit my gym because they weren't making any more progress. But it was based on the measures that they had for themselves, which were nearly impossible. Which was, you didn't start lifting weights until you were in your 40s, so you missed a big window of physical potential. You have a stressful job. You can't put your arms directly over your head because of thoracic mobility issues, and to be honest, you don't really have any right to be doing clean and jerks, and yet you're mad because it's not moving. It's plateaued. What if we stopped your shoulders hurting and so on and so on and so on? Could that be interesting? And what about enjoying and loving and embracing the process of training, of moving your body and how it feels, how good it feels, not just as a stress relief, but the beauty of the human form doing things. And that's that purpose, not PRs, or play, not PRs, however you want to sort of talk about it, or not performance. We don't always have to think about how good are we. What about how good it feels? So I think that's what will sustain us.
Yeah, for sure. And Darren, just sort of finally, what are the steps that someone might take if they're sitting here listening to this, recognizing themselves and some of the things that we're talking about? What would be their steps for sort of beginning to progress to that stage that you just talked about, like finding that, play or purpose? And I know this is not going to suit everyone, but for those who actually that might be more important right now. What do they do?
Yeah, and I feel like I've just told people off for an hour rather than actually offer, usable advice.
No.
But there's room for intense workouts and hard challenges and things like that. Like, I'm still fascinated by trying to take on things that are hard to do. I swam around the mountain a couple of weeks ago, Mikki.
Amazing.
I thought it was 2Ks, turned out it was 3.5, and I haven't swum since COVID.
Wow.
So it was tough. It was really tough. And I had a couple of scary moments even, but made it, and that was cool to achieve, and so things like that, they're cool. But most of the time, we this is just the truth. We should be performing strength training at a moderate level of intensity. Even high is different to very high. We should be doing a lot of low intensity movement. We should be walking a lot. We should be cycling, swimming, paddling, jogging. And the stuff in between, we should be doing quite a bit less of. But it's funny, everything, if we think about energy systems, right? We've got ATP, CP, that's strength training, about 10 seconds to a minute of work. We've got mitochondrial zone 1 aerobic work, walking, jogging for hours. And then we move towards the middle, and it's very glycolytic and lactic, which is 10Ks and marathons and field sport and just about any competitive endeavor and CrossFit and high intensity classes, 45 minutes to an hour. It's always right in this really stressful, high cortisol, lactic, glycolytic zone. And we often forget about the other end of the spectrum. So my advice is start at the outskirts of our energy spectrum. Lift weights, walk. As you get better at that, you can start venturing towards the middle. But just dip a toe in, see how it feels. Do a high intensity class, then go back to your strength training, and see what the ratio or the frequency per week is that works for you. But if we come back to the fact that we don't do much as a society, we need to move more. We just need to do less.
No, that's
and I'm not trying to be Mr. Miyagi, right? We need to move more often. As every day we need to move. We just probably need to do less of it each day. And most people try to do more a couple times a week. And go balls out to make up for it. And that still actually maybe counterintuitively is way more stressful than doing something at a moderate intensity every single day. Like, I don't really believe in rest days per se. Like, generally you need rest days because you've trained really hard. Now, again, if you're being competitive, you probably need rest days to make that adaptation. But if you are training for life, you need to move every day to keep your wheels greased. So it's not so much a rest day as it is maybe a hard day, an easy day, a longer day, a shorter day, a strength day, an aerobic day. But you should be moving every day, and you should be varying that intensity and that duration.
That's awesome. And I think, you're absolutely right. Like, if everyone is if you're not training for some competitive event, which I know a lot of people are, then what you've just described sounds great. And then for those that are, maybe they need off seasons, and I don't think we get a lot of that with all the events splintered across the year. Someone's off season might be 2 weeks, whereas actually compete, train hard, do what you need to do, but then spend some time at those opposite ends of the spectrum to allow your body to recover and to become stronger going back into that next season. Season.
The Eastern Bloc knew how to do it, right? That was where cross training first came from. Varying through it. And I think I'm trying to practice some form of that myself. I think seasonal training is very important, So right now, like tail end of summer, I got, ocean swimming, surfing. As we move into autumn, I'll dust off the mountain bike. As we move into winter, I'm going to sign up at the local jiu-jitsu gym. Nice. And I'll still try to get in the ocean, but I'm not going to be doing as many swims probably. And then as spring rolls around again, we'll start increasing time back in the ocean and so on and so on. And I think that actually helps keep you fresh. Maybe winter time's a great time to do a strength, like sign up to the gym, do a really good strength training block. And then as we move into summer, you start doing a bit more jogging and more cardio oriented sort of things. And we're in this for a long time. I think, again, most people, the way they train is like they're trying to get it all in that 1 year. But if you were, if we were saying instead of 12 months, it's a 12-year or a 36-year challenge. What does the training look like for that? But we're just not wired to believe that. And again, it all comes back around to what I was saying earlier. Like, you do know you're going to die, right? Like, so.
So on that note, Darren, that's a great sort of place to end off. Now, are you taking clients?
A few. I have a standard coaching program where I program training and nutrition for people who are interested in this style of training, training for purpose, for longevity. And I have a couple of VIP slots where we just get right into the weeds, and it's a bit more of an intervention, I guess you could say, and we sort things out in a shorter space, more intense space of time, right? There's places for intensity.
That is awesome, Darren. Where can people find you?
I'm trying to be young and get on the socials. Instagram, we've been spending a bit of extra time on there lately. That's Darren Ellis 75. Or I've got a website that needs some work, but darrenellis.coach. Brilliant.
Darren, thank you for your time this morning. I think you've given people a lot to think about. And I always love geeking out on stuff like this because we're quite aligned. And I look forward to bringing both you and Cliff back on to talk about your book when it's sort of ready to be unleashed to the world. But until then, I think this is a great opportunity to shine a light on things that people don't often think about.
Yeah. Hey, no one wants to get old.
No.
But we do want to live a long time.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Darren.
Cheers, Mikki.
All right, team, hopefully you enjoyed that. And as I said, you can find Darren's contact information over on the show notes to this podcast, or jump on Instagram. You'll find him at Darren Ellis 75. And until next week, where I sit down and chat to Professor Michael Murphy all about MitoQ and coenzyme Q10 and mitochondria. He is a co-creator of the MitoQ supplement. You can find me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, over on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, or head to my website mikkiwilliden.com, where you can, in addition to the meal plans that you can sign up for, you can book a one-on-one consult with me there. All right, team, until next week, see you later.